Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. I'm in Glasnevin Cemetery, Dublin. So behind me is a round tower, such as we used to build centuries ago. And under this one is the tomb of Daniel O'Connell, the Liberator. So Daniel O'Connell was one of the earlier interments in this cemetery, which is the most celebrated cemetery in Ireland. People are dying to get in here. Yes, you would be seen dead in here. And some of the plots are very pricey. So if you're an achingly fashionable person and you want to find a berth to rest for all eternity, this might not be a bad place to end up. So walking away from it, give you an idea of the scale of the place. You can see it from much of North Dublin. You know, we're well north of the Liffey now. Anyway, so he was born in August 1775, the 6th of August if memory serves, in County Kerry. So Daniel is what it's called now, as in the place of Daniel, into a Catholic landowning family. So because of the 1704 Act to prevent the further growth of popery, there was gavel-kind inheritance amongst Catholics, as in all the property was divided equally between the sons, so that quite a notable family would end up with very little. Remember, people often had a dozen children those days, and all right, often only half of them made it to adulthood. But even if you had 6 sons and 3 of them survived, it's still split 3 ways. Whereas Protestants could leave it all to the eldest. That was the usual thing. So what are the other two to do? Well, they've got to find some other sort of occupation. So on the other hand, was it good for us? Because we at least got something. But anyway, by the time he was born, the Protestant minority, 30% of the population at most, held the lion's share of the property, particularly the Church of Ireland minority, which might have been 20% of the population. Because remember, there were some Protestants outside the Church of Ireland. We should call them dissenters. Methodists had just started, Presbyterians, Baptists, Plymouth Brethren, Quakers, and so on. But his family, they made money smuggling things to and from France. It wasn't contraband as such. It was evading import duties. But they had a Protestant friend of the family who nominally held their property, but he was really just a trustee. They were the beneficial owners, but it wasn't through some legal device. He was just helping them out. So they weren't anti-Protestant at all. And his uncle, Maurice Hunting Cap O'Connell, went to France with the Irish Legion, serving Louis XVI. So Daniel O'Connell was well off in a county that was particularly poor. And he grew up bilingual in Irish and English. So he went to a school in Cork. I don't know which one it was actually. And there weren't that many Catholic schools as particularly good ones. He attended Trinity, one of the first of that generation of Catholics who were allowed into Trinity, because Trinity College Dublin, the only university in Ireland at the time, was run by the Church of Ireland. We'd only just been, the Catholic majority only just been admitted to the learned professions, but it was to be decades before the Catholic community was even 50% of any of these learned professions. He also went to study in France, so he became a fluent speaker of French, and he was there during the French Revolution of 1789, and he was aghast at revolutionary violence, so he said, no, we mustn't have that, although he actually wasn't a pacifist. And he returned to Ireland. He was called to the bar. He practiced there. The Colleen Bourne was one of his famous cases. This blonde teenage girl who was abducted and murdered near Croom, County Limerick. He defended the suspect, but his defence was unavailing. The defendant was found guilty and duly sentenced to be hanged by the neck until dead and buried within the prison walls. And the sentence of death was indeed executed on the man's body. So Daniel O'Connell, he threw himself into politics, and he wanted Catholic emancipation, as in no more legal discrimination against us. Of course, we were allowed to vote from 1793, but we couldn't be elected to Parliament as such. The law didn't say you cannot be elected to Parliament, but in order to get into the British Parliament, because we joined the UK in 1801, or previously the Irish Parliament, you had to take an oath which was designed to be incompatible with Catholicism, specifically abjuring the authority of the Bishop of Rome, i.e. the Pope, and often rejecting transubstantiation and so forth, and just in case we're using any casuistry, saying that you're taking this without purpose of evasion, and using the words in the plain, ordinary English sense of the words. Anyway, so in those days, and right up to the First World War, if someone became a government minister, he had to resign his seat, or strictly speaking, enter the Chiltern Hundreds, an office of profit under the Crown, which is held to be incompatible with membership of Parliament. and then submit himself to his constituents again to see if they would accept him as the minister of whatever. And William Vesey Fitzgerald was the MP for Clare, and he was appointed to some ministerial posts, so he had to submit himself to re-election before his electors, and Daniel O'Connell stood against him. There was no oath required to stand for Parliament, just to enter Parliament, so as a Roman Catholic in good conscience he could do so, and indeed he was returned by a heavy majority, the majority of people of the county being Papists. Perhaps the irony is that William Vesey Fitzgerald, a Protestant, was actually sympathetic and believed, of course, Catholics should be allowed to enter Parliament. Well, he couldn't enter because he wasn't going to take that oath. So the Parliament said, well, the seat is still vacant, so you have to have another. Or a court said, the seat is still vacant, so we have to have another by-election. And Daniel O'Connell won again, and the same happened with the third result. So he had his Catholic Association, a mass movement that was Catholic Rent, a penny. From those who joined it wasn't actually rent. And he deliberately kept it low because he wanted hundreds of thousands of people in it and mass meetings. I don't know what a marvelous orator he was. How did he manage to project his voice such as that tens of thousands of people could hear him at a time without any loud hailer system, addressing them in Irish or English all around the county, all around the country, forgive me. And eventually the law was changed. The Duke of Wellington, the Iron Duke, who had been against Catholic emancipation, saying it's dangerous to allow it, but it's even more dangerous not to allow it. He felt that Ireland was in a pre-revolutionary situation, so Catholic emancipation was permitted. Sir Robert Peel, Orange Peel as he'd been known, agreed, and so then O'Connell was in the House of Commons. So the Liberator, we called him. People said he was like the George Washington, the Simon de Bolivar of Ireland. And later he founded the Loyal National Repeal Association, noted its full name, Repeal and No Separation being one of its slogans, saying that we ought to repeal the Act of Union and have the Kingdom of Ireland back again. But he wanted some sort of link with Great Britain, and he was certainly a royalist. Indeed, in 1798 he'd been a member of the militia, he'd be willing to fight for King George III, even though as a papist he was discriminated against by law. So don't let people tell you he's a pacifist, and that really doesn't suit modern nationalism to note that he was against the United Irishmen and willing to fight, physically fight against them. Anyway, so the Repeal Association didn't achieve its goals in the end. It was sometimes banned and then set itself up under another guise. He'd scheduled the Clontarf meeting, and this is in 1842, if memory serves. Clontarf is just north of Dublin. It's now part of Dublin. It's where, in 1014, Brian Boru, the taker of tributes, the King of Munster, later High King of Ireland, had defeated the Danes, and he was going to hold a huge rally there for his repeal movement. And the government was very jittery about this. There were obvious resonances between what Brian Boru was doing and what Daniel O'Connell was doing. Admittedly, he was using exclusively constitutional and peaceable methods, but even though his strategy was pacific, this was unacceptable to the Crown. So the meeting was banned, and O'Connell said, all right, I accept that for the avoidance of bloodshed, because the Peterloo massacre was not long in the past. But anyway, some of his supporters were hotheads and felt he was feeble, he was callow, he was just becoming a bit grandmotherly, and the movement was toothless then. The Young Ireland movement was set up this time, a clandestine revolutionary organisation. Thomas Davis, one of its members, who published that newspaper, The Nation, and penned that ditty, "When boyhood's fire was in my blood, I read of ancient Rome, and ancient free men who bravely stood 303 men and 3 men, and then I prayed I yet might see my nation's fetters rent in twain, and Ireland be a nation once again," and so on. But anyway, so by the mid-1840s, O'Connell was ill, and he was not so energetic, and the baton had been passed on to a new generation. A lot of people were disillusioned by him. His strategy had not paid off. So the generational moment had come and gone for repeal, plus the famine was kicking in. 1846 it starts, 1847, Black 47 is the worst year. So hundreds of thousands of people starved to death. I think about 800,000 people died of the famine. It's malnutrition on its own, or a combination of that, famine, fever. Sometimes it wasn't just the malnutrition that killed people, it was a contributory factor to premature death. You look at excess morbidity compared to what it had been over the previous decades. Now, there are people who say it's over 1 million, there are people who say it's even over 2 million, and obviously there's emigration as well, some of which is due to the famine. But anyway, he decided he wanted to go on pilgrimage to Rome because he was conspicuously zealous as a Catholic, but he didn't quite make it to Rome. He died in Genoa en route to Rome in 1846, and I think, if I got this right, his heart was taken out and is buried there, but his remains were taken back here. He'd previously been imprisoned for sedition beforehand, held, if I think I got this right, at Richmond Prison in Dublin. Later it was a barracks, Richmond Barracks, and then there was a great outcry about this, so he was set free, and people insisted on pulling his carriage through the streets, and you can see that carriage at his house at Caherdaniel. What else about O'Connell? One of the curious things is his uncle, who was head of the Irish Legion in France. He was so horrified at the French Revolution, he offered his services to the King of Ireland, George III, which wouldn't sit well with modern nationalism, because France, being the United Kingdom's usual enemy, if France bested the United Kingdom, Ireland, a sister kingdom, we might break that connection with our eastern neighbour, become a French satellite, possibly a fully independent country. I think that's a bit less likely. So that is just a little bit about Daniel O'Connell. Usually it's open, you can walk the 198 steps to the top, but only if you're over the age of 8. That's enough from me, so thank you so much for your donations. I desperately need those to sustain the channel. Toodaloo.